The Sunday Papers
on Off the Ball.
Now then, you're very welcome back. We are reviewing the Sunday Papers. Very happy to say Ryle Nugent is here in studio, commentator of, well, everything really at the moment. Six Nations, Champions Cup, November Series, URC, day job at Premier Sports as well, former head of sport at RTE. You're very welcome to the studio.
Good to see you.
First time in years.
Too long.
Literally, to have you in studio. Timmy McCarthy with us as well, captained and coached the Irish basketball team, commentator at numerous Olympic Games. Hey Timmy, great to have you with us.
Hi Joe, how you doing? Hi Ryle.
How you doing, Tim?
So I'll just run you through the back pages first of all. A lot of the tabloids awash with tales of Cristiano Ronaldo's departure from Manchester United. Ron gone is the headline on the Sunday World. Cristiano Ronaldo, says Kevin Palmer here, has sensationally asked to leave Manchester United according to reports breaking in the UK last night. It seems Ronaldo is looking at a 19th consecutive season in the Champions League, and he would quite like that as opposed to playing for Manchester United next year. Similar lead in the Sunday Sport. Ronaldo, let me go. Cristiano out is the headline there. Simon Mullock, Manchester United making plans for life without Cristiano Ronaldo. Sunday Mirror Sport can reveal that new boss Erik ten Hag will urge United to replace the unhappy 37-year-old with Ajax's young Brazilian forward Anthony, is what the Sunday Mirror say. We have the Sun then on the top of Ronaldo, my way out. They have banner, read it and weep, R-E-I-D. It and weep. TJ Reid, brilliant yesterday for Kilkenny. Kilkenny, brilliant, full stop. And then we have Sunday Times. They're going with Joey Carberry trying to touch that ball down and not quite getting it down. Pain in the neck is the headline. New Zealand 42, Ireland 19. Ireland still chasing first win over All Blacks in New Zealand after Auckland drubbing. And alongside that, Duncan Castles, with what everybody else has in their back pages, Ronaldo tells United he wants to go. Mail on Sunday. Their big lead picture is the hurling Super Cats. Clare have no answer to Cody's masterclass. And alongside that, Ireland's progress clouded in doubt after Eden Park mauling. That's Shane McGrath, who will come to on the tour New Zealand. And then the Sunday Independent, finally, again, it is a picture of Cian Kenny after he scored his goal for Kilkenny. Ruthless Cats shine. And they were ruthless. We should have known, really. Brian Cody and all that.
I'm not sure. There's a line in one of the papers, I can't remember, I think it might be Dennis Walsh, who says, why are we surprised? What part of us is surprised? And yet I think everybody was surprised with just how clinical and magnificent they were in the first 15 minutes yesterday.
Yeah. One wide in 35 minutes. I know Clare had 24 and all, but we'll call that emphatic, Timmy.
It was a very emphatic performance by Kilkenny. I was surprised by Clare's performance, I must say. I thought that in Munster they played really well. I know that against Wexford they slipped up a bit, but I was expecting a big performance. But Clare were built around Tony Kelly, and you've got to give Kilkenny and Cody great credit for shutting down that avenue, really. And you know, when you shut Tony Kelly down for Clare, it gives them real problems. So on one hand, Clare had problems with wides and with their star player being shut out of the game, really. And on the other hand, Kilkenny showed incredible efficiency. I mean, one wide in 35 minutes, you know, in the critical 35 minutes of the game was very impressive. So yeah, it's interesting that, you know, they've stepped it up, because in Leinster they looked, you know, sort of so at times, but they really stepped up yesterday and are a real contender now for the Liam McCarthy.
Just if you have younger ears in the car at home, the first story we're going to turn to is not suitable for younger listeners, and it also carries a warning. I appreciate that a conversation along these lines could be triggering for many people and upsetting for many people. And I would say at the outset as well that the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre have a 24-hour helpline, which is 1800 77 8888, or you can Google Dublin Rape Crisis Centre and find details there. So we'll be talking about this for, I would think, the guts of the next 10 minutes, and we'll take an ad break then and return to the sports. So I just want to give you a due warning, if I can. Now would be a good time to make a change for the next couple of moments. We're talking about Vera Pauw's revelation on Twitter this weekend on Friday evening, which prompted enormous reaction online, and it's followed up here in the Sunday papers, as you might imagine, in particular by Shane McGrath in the Mail on Sunday and Paul Rowan here in the Sunday Times. The Paul Rowan headline is Pauw's allegations are being taken seriously. She has the full support of the FAI. Ugly side of the beautiful game is the headline. So I'm acutely aware as well of Vera Pauw's a request for some privacy, and also that the details of this are difficult for people. There is also, though, Kevin Doyle yesterday in the Irish Independent and Paul Rowan here, there is a discrepancy in their reporting of the rape allegation as to how often or how many instances it happened on. And so we're going to approach that area with extreme caution. So Kevin Doyle yesterday in the Irish Independent had some details generally around this. So the Independent sister paper, NRC, have been investigating what happened between Pauw and the Dutch FA. And they've spoken to Pauw and to 25 other people as part of this investigation. And so Kevin Doyle yesterday in the Irish Independent detailed some of the findings. The rape allegation stems from 1986 when Pauw was a 23-year-old player, and the alleged attacker is a coach, a football coach, 14 years her senior. And they met initially at a football tournament, and then subsequently the following year is when the alleged attack took place. Like I said, there is a slight discrepancy in the reporting between the Sunday Times account and the Independent account, so won't delve too deeply into the details. Suffice to say, there is an allegation of rape. Vera Pauw reported it to the Dutch police last month, certainly. And the man in question, and this is in Kevin Doyle's piece in the Irish Independent, the man in question was approached as part of that NRC investigation, the newspaper over in the Netherlands, and he said, "I'm stunned by the allegation. Nothing inappropriate has happened in that regard, not in my whole life, by the way." Vera Pauw also detailed 2 sexual assaults which happened in the 1990s, and she's hopeful of a prosecution there. Again, these are people involved very much officially in the game in Dutch football. And KNVB in Kevin Doyle's piece released a statement, I'm sure you've seen, where they certainly talk about failings subsequent to the allegations being made. They say, "We should have tackled a number of things differently. Unfortunately, Vera has been confronted in the past with a number of errors and harmful comments from former KNVB employees." So Kevin Doyle's piece has detail, in conjunction with the NRC paper, has detail on the nature of the attacks. Paul Rowan, in his piece, details some of the treatment that Vera Pauw was allegedly on the receiving end of after these incidents. So he talks about how in 1988 she left Holland to play in Italy, saying she felt, quote, "the shame was still immense," end quote, over what had happened. And on return to Holland, she went to work again for the KNVB. And so, reading here from Paul Rowan's piece, Pauw is reported to have a witness when her former assailant returned to the office one day and went to slap her around the buttocks. But she said, "If you do that, I'll beat you to death." He says here, Paul Rowan, the whispering against Pauw intensified when she and the women's national team coach Bert van Lingen started a relationship in 1992. Her detractors said Pauw would do anything to play for the national team. Gossip, which Pauw found very painful because Bert and I are crazy about each other. It's still the reason we're together. She went on to have great success, as we know, in Dutch football, regarded as one of the main architects of Dutch women's football. They reached the 2009 European Championships, their first major tournament, the women's team, and they finished 3rd. So it was around this time, post 09, where again, writes Paul Rowan here in the Sunday Times, it was at this point that prominent people started to listen to some of Pauw's complaints. And she says that everything was discussed, including the sexual abuse with the technical director at the time, and a follow-up meeting with other senior figures within KNVB. There was an apology, yet NRC, that's the newspaper I mentioned, yet NRC reported that the sexual abuse allegations were not followed up. Pauw made similar allegations to the then technical director of KNVB, but again the matter wasn't followed up. So it said that Van Praag, he was the then technical director, he did make Pauw a KNVB national knight, a big honour over in Dutch football, which he said was an honourable and sincere gesture from him, but also intended by the union to keep me quiet, is Vera Pauw's sense of that. And then a final point, there appears to have been conversations which culminated in KNVB agreeing to an independent investigation into the allegations, and that report was made public outside of their control. So the author of that report, Marion Olfers, Professor of Sports and Law, was highly critical, and she said, she or he, excuse me, I don't know if Marjan is male or female, he or she said that the negative behaviour of KNVB KNVB officials towards Pauw had, quote, a systemic character, end quote, and that the negative image of her was, quote, maintained and nourished time and again so that things have become a self-fulfilling prophecy, end quote. And so it seems Pauw set a deadline of June 12th for discussions about the findings of this report, but she felt she was being fobbed off until after the Women's European Championships, which start this week. And Paul Rowan writes here, now she has cut off discussions with KNVB. After reading the independent report last month, Pauw reported the rape and sexual assaults to police in Amsterdam. And that brings us, Ryle, about to where we are, give or take.
Yeah, you know, there are a couple of articles this week and this weekend that managed to lay out the facts as they are known. And that part is the legal quagmire, I guess. But what isn't is the human tragedy and pain. And there's no dispute around that. And that is handled, I think, magnificently by Shane McGrath in the Irish Mail on Sunday. It's a powerful piece. It's an empathetic piece. It's a sensitive piece. And actually, you feel on a moment like this, you could nearly read the entire piece. I won't, but I will finish with I'll start with his finish. So he says in the end, this is Shane McGrath in the Irish Mail on Sunday, we can offer our words of support, but we can take the words of others, the testimonies of abuse and suffering, and put them out in the world. They need to be read and absorbed. That in some minor way of honouring the story and the bravery of people like Vera Pauw. And I think that surmises Shane's piece at the beginning. He talks, and I quote, the mighty figure has had a tremendous impact on Irish sport, that being Pauw, since being appointed the manager of the women's team, but her influence has now spread far beyond the confines of professional soccer. She's a national figure. Her story has filled headlines over the past 24 hours. Pauw is one more woman who has somehow mustered the courage to share a horrendous experience, knowing the pain and scrutiny it will attract, hoping that it will serve someone else in similar straits. And the pain was palpable in Pauw's statement. One section in particular for her was heart-wrenching. For the past 35 years, she wrote, I have kept this abuse private. I've allowed the memory of it to control my life, to fill me with daily pain and anguish, to dominate my inner feelings. To many, I'm seen as a brash and loud football coach and manager, a tough woman who has risen to the top in a man's world. Nothing could be further from the truth. And then Shane writes, just imagine the effort, the discipline, the sacrifices it has taken to reach the level in her sport that Pauw now occupies. And it continues in that vein, and it is a really engaging piece that I'm struggling to find the right words to say in this instance. It is what Vera Pauw has been through is horrific. It is beyond anything I think any of us can really get our heads wrapped around.
And it's very clear in the KNVB statements, and Paul Rowan has detailed some of the fallout that she endured over, decades after making the allegations, how difficult that must have been, on top obviously of the trauma from the alleged incidents. And you read the line of her statement that Shane highlighted and that jumped out to me, where she talks about 35 years of daily anguish and allowing the memory of it control my life, fill me with daily pain and anguish to dominate my inner feelings. That is a long time to be living with that kind of pain and that kind of trauma. Tim, I know you're reading these pieces as well.
Yeah, I think that Shane McGrath, I think his opening sentences were really, really heartfelt. Words are inadequate. I mean, I think that's the sad thing about this. First of all, as Ryle said, it's a human being, right, who for 35 years has had to deal with, with this individually, from her own point of view, and never mind going through, meeting these people, and I think Kevin Palmer had a piece actually in the Sunday World talking about the FAI support, and I think that was really, really nice that it was called out immediately about the support that the FAI are giving Vera Pauw in that sense. But I think Shane McGrath's piece, of the three pieces to me, brings it to the humanity of it in that sense. It's very sad. I mean, let's be very clear. This is very sad. There's a legal situation going on. It's reported to the Dutch police, so that will take its own course in that sense. But this is really sad in that, a 22-year-old, makes allegations, in nearly in her 60s of being raped and assaulted at different stages in her career.
Yeah, and sorry, Timmy, I just cut across you there because it's not just it's not just about what I'm struggling with again reading this is how often we're reading it, how often these conversations are taking place, how appallingly treated so many now middle-aged, and actually in the United States recently, young women have been treated by people in power, by men in power, and it's sickening. It's a sickening reflection of society and what power and abuse of power can do to other people, and it turns your stomach when you spend 5 seconds thinking about it. It is just everything.
Just to develop that, Ryle.
Yeah.
Just to develop that point, I was going to make the point. Like, it's a reflection of life. Like, this situation with Vera Pauw is just a reflection, to develop your point, Ryle, of life. This goes on. People in power abuse their position, and there's nothing worse, than abusing somebody in this sexual and psychological way. That because she was psychologically abused as well. Sometimes because obviously there's an allegation of rape and sexual assault, that can grab the headlines. But she was psychologically abused as well. They spoke badly about her. If you read the subtext of some of the articles, so it's sickening. I mean, it's a sickening situation. The sad thing is, these things go on today. These are not, consigned to the 80s. Like, this still goes on in our world where people abuse power, and predominantly the people are men. Okay, I mean, that's a predominant situation. It's not 100% men, but it's predominantly men in that sense. And like we've had our own situation in Ireland where we've had sports coaches and sports people abuse children, teenagers, and adults. Okay, so this is not unique to Holland. I mean, but I think the big thing here we should never forget: you have a very successful sports coach who has the ability to compartmentalize this challenge in our life and still be successful. Because the sad thing is, from a human point of view, is there are many people who have endured situations like this that Vera Pauw is alleging, who just didn't get through these things. There are many people who just, despite the support of, centres like the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre and other great bodies around the place, just psychologically found it just too challenging to get through this. And you have to admire her psychological and mental resilience to still, succeed in a game, to go back to the KNVB world and be so successful, despite the fact that, many people in that organisation, had views on her which were not the most complimentary, and there were some people who she alleges sexually assaulted her. So I have to say, I thought the Paul Rowan piece was very sort of systematic, and it just laid out the facts from his perspective. And as you say, Joe, there was some contrast with the ones from yesterday. But I thought Shane McGrath's piece got the human side of it. I thought that, as I said, words feel hopelessly inadequate, but words can reflect convictions, and from that can come change.
Yeah, and both pieces of huge value. I mean, establishing certain facts and what happened, very, very important here. And Paul Rowan does a brilliant job of that. And as you said, Shane McGrath writes so empathetically, and he does make the point. The Dutch Football Association has scrambled to react with statements of regret and vows to make amends. And he makes the point as well, which struck me on Friday. Imagine what it's been like for her as she prepared to go public with her story. And I was suddenly thinking back to the game they played last week, and I'm sure at moments it was crossing her mind. I mean, she probably had made up her mind, I'm going public in the short term. And he says, imagine the pain in recalling what happened, sharing the details of the attacks against her, all the while knowing it would immediately dominate news cycles, and this after a week in which she'd brought her team to Georgia. It feels trite to hail her strength, yet it's impossible not to be left reeling by it. A remarkable figure. And he does make the point as well, this story will run and run. She'll be asked about it. It will frame how she's perceived in some cases. That she was able to endure, let alone succeed to such an extent, while keeping the stories of what happened to her, mostly to herself, both amazing and heartbreaking, but telling it to the world will present new challenges. As she wrote in her statement, I know there will be more heartache to come. So she's aware of what's
Yeah.
happening
and
about to
that
happen.
yeah, and that is part of this that is so hard to get your head wrapped around, is the length of time that these issues take to be investigated and, if required, prosecuted and come to a conclusion, so as somebody can, however they do, get some sort of closure around those horrific incidents. It strikes me in everyday life and in sporting life as well, when it happens in sporting life, that these cases seem to drag on interminably, and how that must be for the people that are living through them is, in addition to the actuality of what happened, the fact of having to live it every day is, again, I don't think we can quite understand it.
Yeah. Well, it seems these allegations are now being taken seriously. They're with the police, and therefore I think while there is now a very public aspect to this situation, that's about as much as we can say, certainly, and we'll let things play out in the Netherlands for the time being. Again, I'm very conscious, acutely aware this conversation is potentially not what people tuned in to hear, and it will be upsetting and triggering for some. So the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre 24-hour helpline, the number again is 1800 77 88 88, and if you Google that, you'll find the details there, all the details you need to reach out if you need to. We'll take a very short break. We're back with Ryle Nugent and Tim McCarthy in just one moment.
The Sunday Papers
on Off the Ball.
The Sunday Papers
on Off the Ball.
You're very welcome back. Joe Molloy here, Ryle Nugent in studio. Tim McCarthy is with us as well, going through the Sunday Papers. We will turn to... there is endless coverage, endless words, all the words you want on New Zealand 42, Ireland 19. We will come to the HIA pieces after we deal with, I suppose, the match analysis. Where do you want to start, Ryle? It was comprehensive on the scoreboard, certainly. What's the general sense in the papers?
General sense is probably Ireland were made to pay. Well, Ireland made to pay for the errors that they made. All Blacks back to their clinical best. Ireland looking a little bit heavy-legged. Some creaks in the armoury. There's some chinks in the armour that are concerning, and we're about to find out whether those chinks are cracks or fissures in the next fortnight or so. And all around, I guess Peter O'Reilly's piece on page 2 of the Sunday Times is probably the best place to start, and he gives a really good overview of what we saw yesterday. I think his second paragraph, some things are immutable. However, give the All Blacks cheap possession, especially off turnovers, and they'll hammer you mercilessly. That's what happened during the disastrous second quarter for Ireland, when they conceded 4 tries in the space of 17 minutes, a period notable for the brilliance of the halfbacks Aaron Smith and Bowden Barrett, but also for the tour's generosity in possession. I was thinking about it, and if you take the component parts of what makes a great rugby team, so the skill set, the accuracy, the strength and abrasiveness, the individual brilliance, and then you try and break it down and say, well, what are Ireland? Well, we're not the top of the tree in any of those things, but what we do have, for me, and this is just my own personal theory, is we have rhythm. And that rhythm comes after 3 or 4 phases, and then we hit 5 and 6, and our accuracy is fantastic. And we've got guys doing things that are distracting defences, and they're fixing defences, and they're making dummy runs. And there's Gibson, Park and Sexton they've got the cigars and the brandy out, and they are playing, and it is just fantastic to watch. Once we get to 4 or 5, and they're dragging defences everywhere, and they're making the opposition guess all the time. The problem is, how do you stop that from an opposition's perspective? Well, you stop us getting into that rhythm, and New Zealand did that really, really well yesterday. They haven't got the most dominant scrum in the world, but they made the scrum really uncomfortable for Ireland. They got in Ireland's faces at the line out. They mauled better than Ireland. They were better at the breakdown. Some of that breakdown work, for me, as objectively as I can, looking at it, was illegal. They were clearing out behind the ruck, but they did all the things that we would have done to them if we felt we could get away with it, and we tested a referee who didn't react to it. And by the way, I'm not making excuses here. There's no part of me. The better team won this and won it comfortably. But how did New Zealand do it? They broke that rhythm. They stopped us getting into that after that opening 10 minutes where we hit that beautiful rhythm that we can hit. New Zealand did everything to stop us hitting that rhythm, and in that second quarter, They absolutely nailed us, and every mistake we made, they punished. And Peter O'Reilly, back to the Sunday Times, they messed Ireland around at the line-out and they outmauled them. They did them at the breakdown too often, rucking well beyond the ball, taking green shirts out illegally. In short, they did what they could get away with and kept doing it until the 77th minute, when referee Carl Dixon finally showed a yellow card, but it was too little, too late. And I think that sums it up perfectly.
Neil Francis, for instance, Sunday Times, Ireland appeared to have little chance without Sexton, so this could be a tough tour, is the byline. He does say Joe Schmidt's fingerprints all over this win. The Aviva last year, Ireland blew New Zealand away at the breakdown and dominated collisions. Accuracy is hard to gauge in such a violent phase of the game, but New Zealand shaped and fashioned the clear out with such precision that Ireland pretty much had to stand off the ruck and try and guess Aaron Smith's next move. It was where the game was won. It is Schmidt's stock and trade, and it was the most significant improvement in the All Blacks' performance when they lost to Ireland and France last year. Yeah, but
what Neil's article doesn't address, and I think is key in this, is I think yesterday, as a collective game of our collective games, proved what we already knew, but proved it very clearly yesterday, which is when the Northern Hemisphere teams travel south in July, or the Southern Hemispheres travel north in November, it's the end of the respective seasons, and at that point the players are cooked. They're done on both sides, so they're emotionally done, they're physically done, and they have nothing more to offer. So it's stacked against the travelling side. Does that mean it can't be achieved? No, it doesn't, but it really does show that there is no, that there's no room for error, and I think that has a huge part of what happened yesterday. I also think, we forget as journalists and as broadcasters and as fans, the fans forget as well, the physical effort that goes into rugby in particular, and also the miles on the clock when you've done that 7, 8, 9, 10 seasons at the top. And I don't think it's any surprise that Dan Sheehan was arguably Ireland's strongest forward yesterday for 80 minutes. He's the youngest, and he's got the least miles on the clock. And he was still going great guns at the end of that game yesterday. So in the end, maybe it shouldn't be a big surprise. Like, you go to the home of arguably consistently the best team in the world over the last 20 years, and you're not on your A game, and you get opened, and so be it. It is what it is. And really what it also proves to me is the World Cup is really the only leveller, because everybody arrives into that in the same sort of condition. They have the same preparation time, and in some ways, and I'm sorry, I'm probably going on too long now, but I think it's worth considering that Ireland's greatest strength in some ways is also Ireland's greatest weakness. So the player management that allows the national coach have more time than any other coach of a Tier 1 team with their players, and minds the players week to week with their club schedule. When it comes to a World Cup, that is dissipated, because all of a sudden all the nations have lots of time with their preparation. They have control over their best players. They all come in with a full pre-season. So that gap that Ireland are able to exploit with the management of the players isn't there for a World Cup, and everybody comes in fresh to that. But have Ireland improved? Absolutely. Over the last 5-6 years, Ireland have improved. Have they improved to the point that we can say they're going to look like a team that are going to get to a semi-final of a World Cup? I don't think we can. I genuinely don't think we can. And part of the problem here is we keep building it up to believe that they will, and the evidence is saying that's not true.
Yeah, increasingly that is the case. So we're talking here with Ryle Nugent and Tim McCarthy. We're just going to... Tim, I can sense you that you're ready to go. You're fired
Sorry,
up.
Tim.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to break off for news. So we're going to come back to you in just 2 seconds. We've loads of pieces to chat through here. Bernard Jackman, for instance, the headline of his piece is "We're out of our depth and we're drowning fast." And he's talking about really just how threadbare Ireland are in the scrum, for instance. And Neil Francis even makes that point that Ireland have been troubled in this area for far too many times. So we'll come back to Bernard Jackman's piece and the HIA controversy on the rugby front in just one moment. We'll take news, though, back in a second. Like I said, news with Tina Gates.
Off the ball.
Now you're welcome back. We're back with the Sunday Papers. Tim McCarthy is here, captain and coach of the Irish basketball team, commentator at numerous Olympic Games. Ryle Nugent, commentator, Six Nations, Champions Cup, November Series, works at Premier Sports. Obviously, that is very much the day job as well. We are in the midst of discussing Ireland, New Zealand, and we were just there before we left touching on the scrum issues, for instance. And Tim, I'll bring you in a moment here on this, because this jumped out to me certainly. So Neil Francis and Peter O'Reilly and various others touch on Ireland's trouble at the scrum. Bernard Jackman pretty much makes it the big focus of his 2-page piece, and the headline is "We're out of our depth and we're drowning fast." And Bernard Jackman says, yes, we had some bad luck with the injury to Jeremy Loughman and Finlay Bealham succumbing to COVID, but he says for a Tier 1 country to have to draft in a last-minute player, Michael Bent, who's practically retired and played his last semi-pro match in November as a 24th man, is pretty embarrassing. We'll hear the excuses about delayed flights and the cost of bringing 42 instead of 40, but this cake has been years in the oven. One scrum at international and provincial level, our scrum at international and provincial level has been creaking, but it seems no one noticed. Will this tour be our Tom Court at Twickenham moment? And he talks how after the Tom Court at Twickenham moment, Ireland put a big emphasis on the scrum, and Greg Feek moved full-time into the IRFU, and there was a national scrum development programme, and he thought that was a fantastic idea, Bernard Jackman, and a very New Zealand-esque type model, and that seems to have slipped. Feek allowed to go part-time with Ireland and also coaching Japan and the Green Rockets in 2018, and doesn't seem to really have been replaced in any grand way. And Bernard Jackman says, I don't blame the current scrum coach, John Fogarty. He's a disciple of Feek, has a high level of knowledge detail. The reality is that 90% of the work in developing front rows happens before they get to international level. And he says effectively, Andrew Porter, Tyke Furlong are being asked to play for longer than their opponents. If one gets injured, we are in even deeper trouble. We're already conceding too many penalties, and I wouldn't even rank the All Blacks in the top 5 scrums in the world. So it sort of seems, Tim, when you look at the general coverage, we lose Johnny Sexton, or we lose Andrew Porter, or we lose Tyke Furlong, and we're really not at the races. We're in big, big trouble. So there's a fairly significant Achilles heel for all the progress of the last number of years.
We spoke about this, Joe, before the autumn internationals, and at the time I made a point in our conversation about what are these tests, friendlies I call them at the time, and I think I got some criticism, but tests or friendlies, we'll agree to differ. What are they about? I mean, the whole idea is to be ready for the World Cup next year. And I think when you look at, the Neil Francis piece and the Bernard Jackman piece, they call out frailties that are becoming much more obvious. I mean, I think Jackman's basically point is we're not bringing new blood in. I mean, his overarching point, he talks actually about Jack Boyle, who was out in Loosehead in the 17-16 win against France. He was the outstanding player. At
20s level, yeah.
Yeah, at under 20s. And, he's not involved. Where the French have an under 20 guy, Fabien Galtier, and he's now, in the French senior squad. So it's Jackman's point, I think, is that, we're out of Sexton, we're out, Furlong and Porter. I mean, I think Porter played 80 minutes just and Furlong 66. No other top country, in rugby are playing, the scrum with key people that length of time in that sense, right? So that's as we don't have the players that come on and replace them. But I think the big thing for me is that the team is not being freshened, okay? I think the key players, Sexton, Furlong and Porter, but particularly Sexton and Furlong, we've a real problem. I mean, they talk about it. Neil Francis makes it clear we have no chance without Sexton. I don't agree with that. I believe that this manager has failed in getting a replacement for success for Johnny Sexton. I think that I spoke previously with you, Joe, and said we've got a mind Sexton, but at this stage he's going to be 38 next year. And Shane McGrath in his piece in the Mail on Sunday talks about the over-reliance of Sexton. His headlines has become now truly pitiful. So when I look at it from an international coaching point of view, I say, okay, what's our agenda here, right? Is our agenda that we now believe, that Andy Farrell believes, this team will compete in the World Cup next year? Ryle has laid his cards on the table and saying we won't get to the semi-final. So is Andy Farrell saying that this team will compete in the World Cup next year? And if he is saying that, there's not enough evidence, okay, in the Six Nations and in this first match of a 3-test, that we will compete to get to the business end of the situation with the current players that we have available to us. And then Michael Bent point that Bernard Jackman makes is just sort of funny, really, Joe, if you think about it. Okay, a guy who has gone from the game, who's playing semi-professional, and just we pick him up because we're stuck. I mean, it's a travesty when you consider some of the younger talent that we could be nurturing in a sense. So my concern after yesterday, it's a game, it's a result. The All Blacks are the best in the world at exposing mistakes, and when we made mistakes, they expose us. Okay, and they do that all the time. And they veer on the illegal side from time to time, but they've got away with that for a long time. But what they did was, in the set piece part of the game, they dominated us. Okay, in the scrum, they gave us real problems when they're not, as the experts would say, in the top 5 scrumming nations. So they gave us a lot of problems around the field, and Joe Smith's influence, as Neil Francis said, was apparent. My concern for the Irish rugby team right now is not yesterday's result or the result over the next 2 weekends, is what's our objective? Do we believe that the 50 starters, which was really close to being our starting lineup, are good enough to perform in the World Cup next year? And if we don't believe that, we have a year to change it. But right now, it looks like Andy Farrell is saying in his selection and in his commentary, I mean, even his commentary after the game, and I know we're going to talk about HIA later, but, that Johnny will be okay, it looks like he'll be okay for next week. I mean, it is really not a good position for us to be in, where our captain goes off with a head injury, and we're now saying, we're depending on him for next week. So if I broaden the conversation to say, the papers highlight the issues we have, and I'm just going to add on to that and say, is our team good enough to win in the World Cup or to perform at the business end of it next year? And if it's not, we need to make changes now.
I'd just pick up on something Timmy's there. I think the Michael Bent thing, I think we need to deal with that separately. Like, for in the first week to lose Jeremy Loughman, for Cian Healy to get injured, for Finlay Bealham to get COVID, for that was just bad luck, and they are on the other side of the world. I mean, and if you took 42, you would have still had a problem, and then Ed Byrne gets delayed on the way over, and I think there were some questions about whether they brought enough hookers or not, and Niall Scannell going up, but I think we can overstate that. So I think sometimes you just have to put it down to bad luck and not bad preparation. So that would be my view around the prop issue. I take the point that Timmy's making, that a lot of the papers are making here, but the facts are, in my view, that we have a depth chart issue at out half and at prop forward after you go beyond Porter and Furlong. And one of the reasons that Porter is there is because the IRFU recognised they had a problem and a depth chart problem, and the coaching staff reacted to that in the best way with the best available tools at their disposal. So, the question, and Bernard is right to ask the question about the future, but the question he's asking about the future, in my view, is about a World Cup a cycle from now, not the World Cup that's coming in 18 months' time. And the truth is, there are key players that if they get injured, we are going to be in more trouble than when we have them fit and available. I mean, look, the Sexton issue, the over-reliance on Johnny Sexton is not news this morning. It's not news 3 years ago. It is what it is, and Johnny is more fragile now than he was because of the way he plays and because of the miles that he has on the clock. I think, and we'll come to the HIA issue in a moment, but Johnny Sexton, for 2 reasons, should not play next week, and I'd argue the week after. Number one, and predominantly, because he has got a head injury of some sort and shouldn't be back out on a pitch next week. And number two, we now need to find out about Joey Carberry, who came in yesterday and actually did okay, but came in when the chaos was there rather than the control from the beginning. So give the guy the opportunity to play if you believe in him, because, look, facts are facts. The law of averages are what they are. Ireland rocking up to a quarter-final in the World Cup with a fit Jonathan Sexton for 80 minutes is at best questionable from this distance. So what's your plan B? And if your plan B is Joey Carberry or your plan B is Ross Byrne, then give them the opportunity. And the Six Nations will not be the place to do it, because unfortunately there is prize money around the Six Nations that is important to the IRFU's coffers, and they can't afford to finish 4th, 5th or 6th because we're planning for a World Cup when they actually need to finish 1st, 2nd or 3rd to keep the books balanced, So so there's a couple of things.
No, they're all really good points. And if Andy Farrell was to go with Carberry for the next 2 weekends and Ireland are roundly beaten, what will the reception be? Can he afford to go over?
I think he can. I think he can. I think he can now afford to lay his cards out. We are where we are. There is a recognition that we've got a decent group of players. They're not going to become a bad squad overnight. They are in New Zealand, a little bit like the women's hockey team going to play in the World Champions backyard in Holland yesterday. The Irish men's rugby team going to play in New Zealand's backyard. Everybody understands that the challenge that brings and the potential downside of that. So I think he's got enough credit in the bank. I think Irish rugby's national team has enough credit in the bank to say, actually, this is the right thing for us to do. And if at the end of that we get spanked, then we found out, and then we move to the next one for the November International.
Because the flip side of that argument is it's very important if you're going to do something at the World Cup to win one down there and bring that sense of belief into next year that you've won on New Zealand soil, and that's the next step for this team, and it would be historic, and these tours are rare, so why would you pass up very rare opportunities to go and get a win? And that means you play Sexton, you play your best team, you really go for it. You know, these are the things he's grappling with. Bernard Jackman's piece really points the finger more so at David Nucifora, I would say, and just the lack of development on the prop front. I think with Sexton, we all have to acknowledge there was something freakish about the fact that there was O'Gara, and then ready to take up the mantle perfectly was Sexton. Like, we're talking a World Player of the Year here, by all accounts a legendary figure, and just what's happened unexpectedly and unfortunately over the last 18 months is the gap has probably widened between Sexton and the rest, and it's just a difficult situation. Everybody's acutely aware he's 38, and yet he's so obviously Ireland's best chance to win a game. So it's difficult, and who knows if playing Joey Carberry makes all that much difference come World Cup time. I mean, he played in Paris, he played against the Italian Six Nations, he has been getting time. He's not really captured form at Munster. There's a degree of responsibility to do it for Munster first, to really force your way in, as opposed to, you know, the strongest argument at the moment is we know you're nowhere near as good as Johnny and you're not closing the gap, but we're just going to play you anyway in the hope that happens. But it's not
it's not a specifically Irish problem either. I mean, you look at South Africa yesterday against Wales, who are a pretty complete, although they didn't show it, are a pretty complete team. They don't know who their out half is. They keep chopping and changing because it is the pivotal position, and the Dan Carter, Johnny Sexton quality that is that extra whatever percentile it is so rare. You're looking for the golden nugget every single time.
Yeah.
And we have a golden nugget. And look at England. Owen Farrell, in his pomp when they were playing in a certain way, was their number 10. They aren't sure who their number 10 is right now. Is it Marcus Smith? Is it George Ford? They don't know.
That's why you'd almost forgive all concerned for this reliance on Sexton. It's down to Sexton's brilliance every bit as much as anything else. But what's unforgivable when you read Bernard Jackman's piece is what's been allowed to happen at prop over the last 5, 6, 7 years.
Yeah, I know. Yes, sorry, go ahead.
I just want to say, Ryle's very upset with this conversation. It's getting to him. He's feeling it. Go on, Tim.
Yeah, no, and I can understand why Ryle is feeling it. I mean, look, the thing about it, right? Johnny Sexton, okay, was World Player of the Year. Johnny Sexton, in his pomp, was one of the best out halves ever to play the game. Let's be very clear. And you made a point that, you know, or Ryan made a point that he followed Ron O'Gara. So we were fortunate. It was like Tony Ward, Ollie Campbell. We were fortunate to have, you know, stars at the highest end of the game. Okay. The problem we have right now, okay, is that we have the two key areas. Out half is the critical area, and the scrum is the next critical area. Mm-hmm. We have vulnerabilities. And the challenge for the coach is to solve that issue. I don't think he can. I'm not sure Andy Farrell can solve the prop issue. Who's coming through? Like, who are we picking here?
Right.
No, and I accept.
And that's where my point is that you've just nailed in one sentence what I've been trying to say for 5 minutes. That is the issue for me. It's not. It just isn't there.
No, unless he brings someone in magically, but he can't.
Yeah.
So that's why Timmy, you can please pick it up. But that's why you'd go to the World Cup with no great sense of expectation. That Sexton, Furlong, and Porter, all three of them, pitch up in a quarter-final in rude health seems very unlikely.
And for me, you know, that's a disservice, I would say, Joe, to the rest of the players who, you know, in the context, I mean, that they will go to the World Cup with no expectation. Because I believe this Irish team have great expectations. And I think yesterday the fact that they kept going to the end of the game, when other Irish teams in the past may have given up the ghost, this team, you know, have a belief that, you know, you have to admire. There's no doubt that, you know, that there's a really sense of opportunity in this Irish team. The reality is, right, okay, is that but I go back to the point, the coach's job, okay, is to make sure that when these three guys fail, and they will fail for for whatever reason, from an injury point of view, that we have the best options we have available after that. Doesn't mean they're going to be as good as these three guys, because these three guys are the top echelons in that sense. But I just think that Ryle's point about Joey Carberry, if Joey Carberry is our second out half, let's just, for the point of view of this conversation today, he's our second out half, okay? Well, then we've got to get him more time. On the basis that, okay, we could have a situation where Sexton may get injured. I mean, Sexton got injured in previous World Cups, so he may get injured. So we have to make sure that Carberry is at a higher level. But then you bring in the practicalities of the Six Nations and the financial issues. And that's the point I would say as a coach. Farrell has to decide, okay, as the coach, because his job is to be the coach, right? The RFU have their job, but Farrell's job is to say, I've got to make sure I have the best options available to me, okay, if any of my stars get taken out. And that's the key that he needs to be. And how do I get my best options available is only giving these guys more time at the highest level.
Well, whether Johnny Sexton plays or not this Saturday is going to be a talking point for various reasons. The playing side, which we've talked about, and also rugby when it comes to head injuries. So Brendan Fanning, page 14-15, really nails it, I think, in everybody's view. Pages 14-15 of the Sunday Independent. Rugby needs to come to its senses. And concussion and the HIA, the head injury assessment, has been perhaps the big talking point across the two games. And Brendan starts by picking apart the week. There's the Jeremy Loughman injury against the Maori All Blacks on Wednesday. Quickly enough, says Brendan Fanning, it became clear to anyone watching a replay that Loughman got a ding. When he tried to stand up after the heavy double tackle that brought him to a sudden stop, he fell over. As he sat there waiting, perhaps for his senses to return, he looked lost. And Brendan Fanning says this was a disaster on two fronts for Loughman himself, and also Cian Healy wasn't meant to play the whole game. But then obviously there was great surprise when Loughman came back on. Now, Brendan quotes the very straightforward World Rugby guidelines in this instance, which is when there is evidence of suspected concussion on the pitch, there is no need for a head injury assessment. And as he described Loughman there was definitely evidence of suspected concussion. His behaviour after that hit was very worrying. And so you would say, according to World Rugby guidelines, there shouldn't be a HIA here. You're just out of the game. And yet there was a HIA. And what's more, Loughman passed the HIA and he came back onto the field, and he was only taken off at half time. And so Brennan says a number of questions arise out of this. He says, surely the independent match doctor who agreed to the Irish request to put Loughman through a HIA hadn't seen the evidence on the pitch, the video evidence that is, or else he would have knocked it back. The Irish say they hadn't seen the video of Loughman after the contact either, but they did feel something was wrong. And Fanning also says, moreover, the doc somehow carried out the HIA without anyone tapping him on the shoulder and pointing out what had been obvious to everybody watching at home. How could that possibly happen, is the question that he asks. And he says, after the game, the Irish camp had been quick to throw the independent match doctor under the bus, claiming he had access to the video evidence during the HIA, and that crucially, the first Ireland's doctor, Kieran Cosgrave, had seen if the damning pictures was at half time, where he immediately took action. So the Irish reporting of this, the Irish camp's reporting is Loughman examined. They only saw the video of him clearly looking dazed and confused at half time, and at that point they took him off. It seems a part of this issue is that this wasn't a test rugby match as such, and so with test rugby matches there are a lot of spotters and seated pitch side, and they have sophisticated technology to pick up incidents easily. Whereas the Maori game wasn't a full test, so it seems
the infrastructure wasn't there. Yeah,
all of that architecture around the game wasn't there. And again, you know, the point is made: if this was at the Aviva Stadium, this would have been spotted earlier. So that's Loughman for the moment. We can come to yesterday's game in a second, but Brendan Fanning makes the point at the end that Loughman was blessed to avoid a second head injury that could have had catastrophic consequences. It was an avoidable scenario, and there's no secret in that. We'll get on to yesterday's match in a moment, but just the Loughman one, because the New Zealand investigation into how he came back on, Tim, they came out and acknowledged he just shouldn't have played again. But as Brendan Fanning says, you just come away with so many questions as to how in 2022 that injury happened. Everybody at home saw he was not well on the pitch, and he should never have gone near a HIA, but he did, and he passed the HIA, which brings the whole HIA into question all over again, that he was able to pass in that state. And it was only around half time that somebody saw the video, and then he was taken off. So it's just a terrible look for the game.
It's a terrible look for the game, and it's a very fortunate break, I suppose, for Loughman, in the sense that, you know, in the time he was on the field, obviously with this concussion, that he didn't get any more serious damage. I think Brendan also says the Murray game was not a full test, rather its first cousin. I thought that line was actually very scary because, you know, we have an international team out there, and even if we're playing the Murray, you know, the Murrays, or we're playing, you know, local teams, like, everything should be done correctly. You know, we are out on tour, like, with a full international team, and it's not just the big games against New Zealand. There's other games. We should be making sure that the procedures are followed, and, you know, there is a procedure. So, I mean, first of all, I mean, the New Zealanders put their hands up, right, and said mea culpa. But I also think that the RFU should be saying, well, why don't we have video evidence? It's our job to protect our players as well.
He says that, in fact. He says who did the recce and who agreed that these were the conditions.
Yeah, I mean, that's the point. So we knew that there was going to be challenges, and we accepted that. And that's a question that we have to ask ourselves. Because our job is to protect our players. Our job is to make sure that the facilities... Look, you know, head injuries are a real problem in a lot of sports. But, you know, they've become much more problematic, obviously, in rugby, and been highlighted in the last number of years. And if you have procedures to protect the players as best as possible, then in your recce's, you've got to make sure all these procedures are in place. You know, you can't say, well, we skip it on this one because it's a first cousin, as Brendan says, you know, to a full test. So I just think what we have to be very clear, our primary job as an association is to protect our players. Our job as a coach is to get the best out of our players. And our job as a sport is to follow the procedures. And the fact that the procedures of cameras and videos not being available in this is really damning on all involved, I would say, Joe.
Yeah, I think it's another example of the sport of rugby really letting itself down in the way that it's like. So you can focus on this just one example, but there are lots of examples of the way players have been allowed to play on, and there is always a reason. And look, we're dealing with human error as well, and people make mistakes, and you have got to recognise that. But the overall look here is not a good one, and I'm really concerned about where we're going here, because there's the HIA issue when players are on the pitch and how that is managed. And then there is the part of the reason that we have HIA issues is because players were being hit up and around the head, and the officiating of that from the Northern Hemisphere to the Southern Hemisphere is lacking consistency by any measurement, in my view. You just have to look at the Gallagher Premiership and URC season versus the Super Rugby season and look at the different ways that incidents are being refereed.
You get away with a lot more in the Southern Hemisphere. It
seems that more is allowed in the Southern Hemisphere, but what that creates is, well, international rugby this week, and players not really sure which rules are we refereeing this week. Irrespective of that, if we're going to be serious about head injury, then we're on the side of caution here until we get it right, rather than on the side of danger, and we'll pull back from that again. And then there's the third part, which is the disciplinary process around that, which seems to be, well, I'm around the game a long time and I don't understand it. I don't understand how people get 12-week bans with 6 weeks off for good behaviour, or it's only the 14th time he's done it, so we're going to give him 3 weeks off, and I'm being facetious on purpose, but there is a lack of consistency. Yeah. And the truth is, the game is in trouble, in my view, for the way that it is being managed around head injury assessment, both on the pitch, off the pitch, and the consistency of officiating. And I'm not blaming the officials here. It's the consistency of officiating. And we understand the consequences here. And this nonsense of physicality and wanting to dominate, you can dominate the opposition physically without making the opposition have to pay for that 20 years from now, right? So that holds true in rugby, in Gaelic games, in soccer, in whatever it might be. It is, after all, at the end of the day, a game. And we're talking about, truthfully, we're talking about life and death issues here, and it is that serious. And you wonder why it's taking so long, with all the scientific information that we have and all the examples that we have in different sports, for us to say, actually, this is now the consistent ruling and this is the way it's going to be managed. And we're going to get it right over the next year or 2 years. And I'm afraid all these variances of the incidents managed on the pitch, the incidents managed off the pitch, all add up to confusion and a bad look for the game, and ultimately bad situation for the players.
Yeah. Brendan Fanning continues on the Dave Heffernan incident yesterday then. He says the Heffernan ding had much in common with Loughman's experience. Buried on his first carry, looked almost lifeless when trying to present the ball, and then he staggered in getting up. Unlike Loughman, he didn't fall over. Quickly he was pulled aside by a medic, but after a consultation on the field, he played on for another 2.5 minutes, during which time he scrummaged, cleaned and carried before being called ashore. Mercifully, he didn't make a tackle in that time frame. Seemingly there was communication between the Irish medical team and the independent match doctor over the video evidence, and the latter decided to take the player off. So he's now out for 12 days. There wasn't a need for a HIA, so at least there was a difference in how Loughman was treated once he was taken off. And then Johnny Sexton was taken off right away. He failed HIA 1. He passed HIA 2, subsequently Andy Farrell revealed to the media, and now there's going to be HIA 3 in the coming days.
So there is the confusion. So you have Jeremy Loughlin and Dave Heffernan under one set of instructions, but because Johnny failed 1 and not 2 tests, we're talking about putting him back in 7 days' time. I mean, what part of anybody thinks that's okay?
See, these are the protocol.
Yep, no, I understand that. Yeah. I understand that, but
instinctively,
there's a. You've heard the phrase "the law is an ass."
Yeah,
but it feels like the law is an ass here.
Yes, this week. So the Loughman situation, he should never have had the HIA because of how he was behaving on the pitch. But then, what really brings the whole thing into some kind of disrepute is somebody who had that hit and behaved that way was able to pass the HIA and get back onto the pitch, and was only taken off after there was video evidence. Johnny Sexton seemed to fail his first HIA, pass the second one. Like, we're now back to a point where you'd have to say to anybody, do you have total faith in the HIA? And who could really?
No.
And yet it's, you know, it's official, and it's got its head injury assessment, and it sounds like it's all knowing and all powerful. But like here in some several test cases, it's been completely undercut. But there are no easy solutions here because there are so many head contacts in the game.
But I think there are easy solutions, Joe. I think it's out, it's done, and move on, and that is where we are until such time as. Not until such time you're out, and people will say that will change the game in its recognisable game now to a different type of game, and the truth is it likely will, but so be it.
Yeah. Last word on this one, Tim?
Yeah, I just to develop Ryle's point there. There are solutions, okay, and to me, what would be a very clear solution would be that if there's a player goes down with a head injury, you don't have a chat with the player. It's the independent doctor there and then makes the decision, okay? And has video evidence, as he's making that decision. The first priority is to protect the player. I mean, Brendan Fanning says it's a matter of time before consequences are catastrophic. So there are solutions. The solutions are take it out of everybody's hands other than the independent medical doctor, and his only task is to protect the player. Not whether the player can play again in the game, is to take the player out. If there's any danger, if there's any doubt, it's not a case he looks to be okay. We have to be 100% that he's okay. So my view is very simple. Put in a procedure and follow the procedure, but have an independent person at every situation and make sure that irrespective of the value of the player, because that will come into question, the value of the player, that the player is protected and taken out. And if he's out, then basically there's a set time that he's out for. Forget HIA 2s and 3s and that. If a guy goes off with a head injury, Joe, he should be off, and there should be a set time before he could play again.
The person that's closest to this thing the whole way through, and they're already doing a huge amount, is a referee. Like, referees see players go down. Referees saw Jeremy Loughlin go down, and again, there's absolutely no part of me blaming, I think it was Wayne Barnes on this, but Wayne Barnes saw him go down. Like, for me, that's don't know whether you saw it or not, he's out cold. He's not coming back on. And we're not having a conversation about whether the doctor saw it on the monitor, whether the infrastructure was right, etc. Like, it's just done.
We'll take a short break. Ryle Nugent, Tim McCarthy staying with us.
The Sunday Papers.
On Off the Ball. Alive and Kicking with Claire McKenna.
This week on the Alive and Kicking podcast, Prader-Willi syndrome, the condition where you never feel full and constantly seek food. I'll hear from a parent who wants the stigma to lift for her 9-year-old son Henry. CEO of Breast Cancer Ireland Aisling Hurley will be discussing the latest advancements in treatments, and performance nutritionist Sinead Bradbury gives her take on a holistic view of health.
Alive and kicking.
With Yakult. Catch the Alive and Kicking podcast at newstalk.com or on the Newstalk app powered by GoLoud.
Dedication is a choice. Courage, belief, all choices. Supporting your county during the All-Ireland Championship, well, that's more than a choice, that's pure passion. That's why we choose to sponsor the GAA All-Ireland Hurling Championship, and why every day in villages, towns and cities all across Ireland, we are choosing community. Because we know that great communities don't happen by chance, they happen by choice. Community matters. We choose community. Centra. Live every day.
With a smart meter, you can take full control of your home's electricity usage. But here's the important bit. Only if you sign up to an Electric Ireland smart meter plan. Our personalised usage insights will help you make the most of your electricity. So if you'd like to find out the perfect time to put on a wash, or see how your bill's looking on any day of the month, search Electric Ireland smart meter plans and find out the best plan for your home. Smart meter required. T's and C's apply.
When it's time to make your move, make it with confidence in the new Volkswagen T-Roc. Feel more in control with Park Assist, LED headlights and a digital cockpit equipped as standard. Turn heads with a new sharp, sleek interior and exterior design. That's confidence all wrapped up in the new Volkswagen T-Roc. Or make your move in the agile T-Cross or the all-new Taigo SUV Coupe. Search Volkswagen SUV.
Volkswagen.
Do you know how green skills can benefit you as an employer? Skills to Advance has a range of green skills courses that will help make Irish business greener, improve cost savings, competitiveness and profitability, develop new skills in your team and access highly subsidised training. For more information, contact your local education and training board or visit skillstoadvance.ie. Boost skills, boost business with Skills to Advance. Brought to you by Sulis and the ETBs, an initiative of the Government of Ireland.
At 410 a bid, at 410 a bid.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's not just the Galway races that everyone is looking forward to in the west of Ireland, but the forthcoming O'Donnell and Enjoy's property auction is the talk of the town, with over 40 properties going under the auction hammer, and all must be sold. You'll be winner all right at the O'Donnell and Enjoy's property auction, which takes place on Friday the 8th of July at 12 noon in the Harbour Hotel. For further particulars and a catalogue, contact O'Donnell and Enjoy's auctioneers at 091 564 212. That's 091 564 212. All done. Sold.
The Sunday Papers.
On Off the Ball.
You're welcome back. Ryle Nugent and Tim McCarthy going through the Sunday Papers. I appreciate there is a degree of listener fatigue maybe with the Armagh-Galway discussion, and yet some of the pieces in the papers today really are stand out and worth reading. Mick Foley in the Sunday Times talking about it. We have Mark O'Shea in the Mail on Sunday, and Joe Brawley and Colm O'Rourke addressed as well. For instance, Brawley and O'Rourke, pages 12 and 13 of the Sunday Independent. Brawley is absolutely scathing of, well, the headline says it, Armagh's rotten culture. And he starts off...
He's got a bit of form here, though, Joe, with McGeeney. Let's call that.
Sure. There is that. He says, he himself says Armagh have form. And so... He says McGeeney, in his interview with, which we played last week, people would generally have heard there's an exchange with McGeeney and Mark Sidebottom at the BBC, and he says instead of defending it in any way, McGeeney should have said what happened there was completely unacceptable, and he didn't. And he does say, Joe Brawley, not all of the Armagh players were involved in the goading and hitting and the over-the-line tackling. He's talking during the game, not just in the melee here. But enough of them were to create an unsavoury atmosphere. It's the third time this season an Armagh game has boiled over into an all-out fracas. 1 melee is unfortunate. 2 might be a coincidence. 3 suggests a culture, is what he said. And he talks about Tiernan Kelly, and everybody's in agreement in condemning what he did, but he does say, that said, he's a young man and he can only learn from this. In the GA family, we will protect him as we always do, but we must also hold him and the management team that permits this culture to account. And he starts referencing some of the incidents that Armagh have been involved in recent times. The game against Cavan, where melee broke out during the parade before the game, and he says in the course of the Malik, Cavan's Martin Dunn, who scored 8 points against Armagh in the previous year's championship, sustained multiple fractures that forced him out of the game before throw-in. And he mentioned that it's infamous, I think, at this stage, that infamous game between Dublin and Armagh behind closed doors at DCU, where Davy Byrne sustained a facial injury that required surgery the following day. And he quotes David Hickey, the eminent transplant surgeon, Dublin team doctor at the time, who recounted the episode to me last week, says Joe Brawley. Davy's man, who, by the way, says David Hickey behaved disgracefully last weekend against Galway, pulled his shirt over his head that evening and pummeled him very badly. The attack on Davy was the worst assault I ever saw in Gaelic football, is David Hickey's account. And I told Jim Gavin to get our boys off the field and send Armagh home. What happened afterwards was a typical GA conspiracy of silence. It was shameful, and Pádraig Duffy wrote about that in his annual report, of the silence and the refusal of anyone to cooperate with the investigation. Pádraig Duffy said, group solidarity is one thing, code of silence that condones violence quite another. And he went on to say the cover-up has damaged the GA's reputation. Brawley then says the following January, Armagh hosted Cavan, McKenna Cup, another very unsavoury affair, and on it goes really. He does say again, the majority of these Armagh players conduct themselves with honour and integrity on the field, but there is a hardcore who do not, and this is now an established pattern. It's a rotten culture, and in the end, management is responsible.
I mean, I was joking about Joe having previous with Kieran McGeeney. I think it's important to say, I think his article is really balanced and fair opinion. It isn't a personalised attack. He's laying out the case as he sees it, and when Joe does that, he's a very hard man to argue with. And it's a really, really strong piece. And you know, we'll come back to the issue, I'm sure, in a moment about actual gouging and where that has come from, because actually, you know, there was a point where it was the sole weapon of choice for South American rugby players, and it somehow found its way into continued through rugby and now into Gaelic games. And in one of the articles, it may well be Tommy. Is it Michael Foley's? Can't remember, but it was the list of incidents of gouging over the last 4 or 5 years, maybe even longer, and we've all heard of them over the last week or so. It is. Colm O'Rourke talks about it. It's actually Colm's piece is really good in terms of providing context for this. He said, Colm writes, in another life, I was part of a team who were not known for being too delicate. Maybe that leaves me in a better position. Strange as it may seem, I can't recall any similar incident in my time with Meath. The players hit hard, sometimes unfairly, but it was upfront, and there was categories of foul behaviour which were completely outside the pale. I was involved in quite a few skirmishes at club level, but at that time there was a basic rule of engagement. Anyone who kicked, spat or headbutted was fair game for a good hiding, but I never heard of eye gouging until it became a problem in rugby. There are very severe penalties for specific offence in the game of rugby, but I have to say I find it hard to understand why someone would try to cause damage to another person's eye. The answer, I guess, is that sometimes the best of young men do extraordinarily stupid things.
And Mick Foley takes up that point. He writes at length about Tiernan Kelly, and he does, talk about how Kelly had been playing very well for Armagh over the last couple of years and was poised to have a really big season, and injury has curtailed his season. And Mick Foley writes, whether the frustration of a lost season somehow sparked the blind madness that engulfed him last Sunday as he gouged Damien Comer's eye, Kelly would also know that no excuse or explanation is sufficient. But he does say nothing about his playing style, temperament or the trajectory of his career raised any red flags. He was a pupil at St Paul's in Lurgan. He was made head boy. Everything about Kelly was pointed towards great things, but still last Sunday happened, and after a week of silently suffering the public glare, his 24-week ban was confirmed, and he was urged to make contact with Comer and apologise, which he did. The sense from Armagh was don't do any interviews and stay quiet, and so that's questioned in one of the pieces. Maybe it would have been better if he just came out and spoke of his regret, but he said nothing anyway. It's funny, O'Rourke, it's like him and Brawley have copy and pasted the point, but I suppose it's a point which occurred to a lot of people. Not all of the problems at the end of normal time, says O'Rourke, were of Armagh's doing. Galway players and subs did their share of mauling. However, getting involved in one big melee in a year can be passed off. 2 is getting very careless. But after 3, there are very good reasons why Armagh now find themselves in the dock. If the situation, is dismissed by them as a media witch hunt, then they really have got a problem. And, Brawley makes that point as well, because in the exchange with McGeeney, there was a degree of McGeeney was saying, well, you need to watch the video against Donegal, and there was a sense of feeling under attack, I would say, on McGeeney's part, and it's very easy to go after Armagh. But and Brawley takes up that point. He said, instead of McGeeney just condemning the whole thing, he writes, instead it was poor Armagh. How dare the television cameras capture one of our players eye gouging an opponent? Do they not realise the eye gouger has a family? How dare people watch it on TV? How dare they comment on it? When a game is played in front of over 70,000 people and another 750,000 watching at home, it's a strictly private matter. The player's privacy has been invaded. It's a witch hunt. And it does highlight the kind of fallacy of trying to point to this as a witch hunt. So that's a reasonable summary of those 3 pieces. Tim, do you want to come in and what struck you?
Well, what struck me was, first of all, that the unacceptability of it from both teams. And I think Colin O'Rourke mentioned that if you take the incident itself, both teams were involved. Obviously, the gouging was specific to Tiernan Kelly, right? And Mark O'Shea, his piece in the Mail on Sunday, talks about a photograph in the Castle Bar where I go down to meet my friend Gat Carey in Stirling, and he shows me these photographs of Kerry victories against Cork, but a Cork player sticks an eye in the finger of Seamus Moynihan, and that Colin Cooper and Donny has had it. But he also says, it's every dressing room could have that story, which touches on Ryle's point that how is it creeping from South America into GA. My view on this is that unless you have rules and processes and really harsh penalties, then this is going to carry on. This is not the first time there's been, 2 groups of players having fights going into tunnels at different stages, half-time or full-time, or in some cases as they come onto the pitch in that sense, right? And there's really, there's no real punishment. Tiernan Kelly got 6 weeks, okay? But the rest of them might miss a game, and that could be appealed. And obviously the papers called out, Armagh's ability to go down the appeal route, and Colin O'Rourke calls out about the CCC, the CAC, the CHC, the DRA, and then every player's right to go to the High Court. So when he contrasts that with rugby, where there's the citation officer and they impose a penalty, and then there's an appeal, and that's it. It's one appeal, and that's it. So I just think that sadly, our national game is tarnished with this repeatedly. It's happened at club level. It's happened at obviously at the county level. It was visible last week in front of 750,000 people watching it, and the 70,000 people that were there. And there's no place for it.
Yeah, I think I pick up on that point, because I think it's really, the GAA are rightly recognised for contributing so much to society in this country, and what they've done for local communities and for local people, and the facilities. You could list the sense of achievements for the GAA for the next half hour. But what comes with that is a responsibility, and I've no doubt they understand that responsibility. But we're talking about, at the highest level, we're talking about role models for the next generation coming through, and what has been allowed is a sense of being able to do things on a football pitch that you would not be allowed to do on the main street or the main square of any town or village or city in this country. So that has to come with a consequence. And to the point, that consequence is not, again, we're talking earlier about rugby's consistency. There is no consistency around that. There's no sense that it is at a level that dissuades or discourages, and actually in some ways is a bit of a wink and a nod that says, go on lads, that's great, go on lads, it's grand. And that's, it's a societal issue. And you can get too lofty about this.
I was just going to say, so...
You can get too lofty about this. I can get too lofty about this.
The eye gouging, of course, everybody condemns, and that's a moment of madness in that young man's life, and he'll always be tarnished with it, and I feel a sympathy for him actually in some respects because of that, because I'm sure he feels horrific. Okay, so, but you have to condemn that rightly, and that was severely punished. So park that for 1 second, and I'm not sure we can just say, well, park it, I'm picking and choosing. But if we were to park that, say the eye gouging hadn't happened, how bad was the jostling? Yeah, it looked ugly and there's lots of people involved, but don't we have to allow for human nature here? This is a physical game, you're pent up, it's a bit of jostling, there is a a sort of alpha male aspect to it, where you impose yourself on the opposition and vice versa. Like the wink and a nod that you use is kind of an allowance for the understanding this is a physical game and these emotions are running high, and these things do happen at times. No?
I'm not taking one side or the other, but what I'll say is there's lots of physical games around the world. Do you see that in other games? Do you see that? I'll call it skullduggery, dark art, bit of wink and nod, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And is it a uniquely GAA thing? You tell me, Timmy. I mean, what's your sense? I don't see it anywhere else.
I guess ice hockey has its fair share of
ice hockey absolutely does. Yes, good
like
point.
in rugby, you do see coming togethers and people are holding each other. Now it's rare a punch is thrown, and
there was a headbutt thrown yesterday in the Australian-England match by one of the Australian players who and when I say a headbutt, it was definitely forward momentum on the head, but it wouldn't be what you would have called something that you would see, in its fullest sense. Yeah. Definitely had sent off, and I am guessing a significant ban coming for it. Yeah.
And actually, Joe, on that point in the Australian game, he actually had his hair pulled by the English guy, so he was reacting. The English guy put his hair and he headbutted, and he was sent off immediately. So the point I would say about, this wasn't handbags, by the way. Yeah, this wasn't just, like guys bumping shoulders off each other, right? The first thing I believe the GHB is doing is, who was the first person to start this? Because the first person who was to start all this, is the person who really is culpable in that sense. So in my view, there's no place for this. This is not just handbags, guys bumping off each other and alpha male stuff. This is people, who are doing things on a football field they would not get away with doing in society. And if you take rugby, which is as physical a sport, and you could argue a more physical sport in that sense, this doesn't happen. This doesn't happen that the two teams are, like take New Zealand and Ireland, just beat each other up as best they could, physically, emotionally and psychologically for 80 minutes and shook hands after the game. I mean, so there is a problem. And the reason I believe the problem gets exaggerated in GAA, which is a sport I absolutely love, is that the discipline process is not consistently applied. And what happens is that, if I'm a coach of a team or a manager of a team, I'm trying to get my players off. To be very clear, I'm trying for the next game. That's my job as the player. But the system and the association should be black and white on this. I mean, it should be absolutely crystal clear. This is not acceptable in our national sport at any level, not just at the inter-county level. And if you transgress, we are going to penalise you. And there's no ifs or buts in that sense. And you also, Joe, as well, have to question the officials last weekend when this was all going on. You have to question the officials. I mean, they took the easy way out and sent off the two captains, They weren't the two players. I mean, it's proved that Sean Kelly hit nobody. So, there was guys hit each other, and had no penalty against them. I thought it was disgraceful. I thought it tarnished our national sport. People talk about being a great game, and I just thought it was a disgraceful episode. Not just the gouging. The gouging is unacceptable. We've talked about that consistently. But I just thought the whole situation was disgraceful.
Did you?
I played sport at the highest level, Joe.
I wouldn't go as far as
I sort of feel disgraced. I don't know. I think what turned me back in their favour was the politicians getting in on the act, and I just thought there was such a hypocrisy there, and talk of 5-year-olds being traumatised by it. Same 5-year-olds watching wrestling this morning, I guarantee you. I just thought some of that was a bit much.
Sorry.
I agree with that. I agree fully with that. But the politicians are making comments for different reasons. I mean, as you say, the 5-year-olds are watching WWE, and so in that sense. But the point is, I just thought as an incident, in its isolation of the incident, I just thought it was disgraceful.
Did you? Well, I gouging aside, what was so egregious about it? Lots of people involved for sure, and holding each other and all that, but disgraceful? No one threw a punch.
What's disgraceful is that players can't, go into a locker room or a dressing room, whatever you call it in that sense, and be manly enough to avoid their opponents and just get in and get ready for extra time.
But don't we have to allow for human nature? That encounter has happened so many times at that tunnel that it's a natural, emotions are high. It's just a certain environment where that kind of thing happens, and you can't take a backward step. And I think we've got to be a bit more understanding. No,
that means, and I'm not arguing, but if you follow that argument through, you're saying it's part of the culture of the game.
It is.
Okay, so we're accepting that it's part of the culture of the game, and therefore it's okay. I'm fine, but let's say that.
But Joe, if you just take Ryle's point there, and we've had instances in the past where these brawls between players have ended up in the stands. I mean, we had a situation with Tyrone at one stage. It could have been Armagh, but Tyrone at one stage, maybe Dublin. You know, they had the fights actually escalated into the stands in that sense. So it's just not acceptable. No, it's brilliant to see their athleticism. It's brilliant to see that. Let them just play the game.
I appreciate it's not good. What would upset me far more, like I'll never forget being at a club match where the sliotar was at the other end of the pitch, and I literally saw a player lift his hurl and crack it over the back of his opponent, and the hurl broke, and that was an act of violence, and he should have been in jail. Never acceptable. Punching someone in the face, never acceptable. I thought there was a degree of last week which was just theatrics, and then that eye-gouging moment blew it into a very serious thing. And there's a bit of that here, you know. There's a bit of that. Like, for instance, what was the Galway captain sent off for? He was very involved.
Yeah, no. I think there's a nuance to the argument. I do think there's a nuance to the argument, and it would be easier to have this conversation without the gouging piece in the middle of it, because you can't, no matter what way you look at it, you can't get away from the gouging as the spark.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So Tim, It is embedded and ensconced in the GAA culture, though, no? Club level up, like underage matches up, this sense of physicality and sledging and being the alpha over your opponent, and that is very much part of the sport, no? And how do you get rid of that?
Okay, well, first of all, it's definitely embedded. There's no doubts in that, right? Okay, and so being the alpha and being physical and standing up to your opponents, that's all acceptable. I mean, that's all acceptable. What's not acceptable is the sledging, and what's not acceptable is off the ball stuff and stuff like that goes on.
Yeah.
How you get rid of it is you first of all you deal with it as a manager and as a club. But when it's brought to the associations, be it a county board level or at national level, you come down ruthlessly, clinically on it. You absolutely take it out of the game. You stamp it out.
Yeah, no, fair point. See, I think the interesting thing is that it's socially acceptable in GAA. Socially acceptable. You're not deemed as, like, that evening around town, you're not deemed as like, geez, you should be ashamed of yourself because you got involved in argy-bargy. It's like you're glorified. Until it's socially unacceptable, all the disciplinary improvements in the world, well, it only goes so far. I think it's sort of celebrated and mythologised, and that's part of GAA. Like, we had Eddie Brennan and James O'Connor on with us during the week, and we were doing a nostalgia piece. Actually, like, not of the nostalgia is about like who hit who. You know, like, it's mythologised in the GAA and always has been.
Doesn't make it right, Joe.
Well, that's ultimately I know you're right, and yet people don't see it that way, I don't think. I think they do see a bit of, sure, look. Anyway, the next time you're on, we'll be talking about it. I'm sure it'll pop up again. Before we go, Tim, you wanted to mention Eoin Morgan, and there are several pieces on Eoin Morgan, who has retired. And I guess Eamon Sweeney has a great opening line to sum the whole thing up, really. Eoin Morgan enjoyed one of the greatest of all Irish sporting careers. The fact that he played for England shouldn't prevent us from celebrating it. Discuss.
I thought these two pieces were outstanding. I thought that, it actually highlighted how brilliant a sports person Eoin Morgan was. It highlighted his Irishness, because he talked about the love of hurling, and that, he just loves hurling. But I think Ed Smith's piece, okay, in addition to Eamon Sweeney's, talked about his leadership, talked about his ability to make a decision and not flip, even when all the pressure came on against him. And I think people listening in business should listen to this. He made a decision. He lived with the consequences of it. If the decision was wrong, he changes it and makes another decision. But he made the decision and lived with the consequences of it. It talked about the pressure of captaincy does not eat into a leader's emotional resources. For some captains, the jeopardy of decision-making fuels their resources rather than depletes them. The higher the stakes and the harder it gets, the more they love it. And that's what leadership is. And I just thought that Ed Smith captured it. And then Eamon Sweeney, as you said, one of the greatest of all Irish sporting careers. I mean, he transformed this English program. I mean, transformed it. I mean, he, under his captaincy, they did things that they have never done. They won a World Cup. And I think then one of the great things, and why he deserves, for me, tremendous respect, he had the courage to make the decision to retire when it was the right time to make it, both for him and for his team. And that's very difficult in a professional or amateur sport, knowing when to retire. So to me, I was thrilled to read both of these pieces. I'm glowing in my admiration of what Eoin Morgan achieved. And these two pieces, individually and collectively, capture the outstanding leader he was. And England benefited more than Ireland. But that was just the reality of the sport he played.
Yeah, I would agree. I think they're excellent pieces. Eamon Sweeney's piece, I think it's important for people to understand that captain's role in cricket, and Eamon Sweeney makes the point, the captain's role is perhaps the most important in cricket. The captain's role is perhaps more important in cricket than any other sport. The best are de facto player managers given free rein in deciding on the batting and bowling and fielding approaches of their team. And that really gives you, for those that don't understand it, like that role, and that Morgan was able to fulfill it so successfully, and what he's achieved, it really does require the recognition that it gets in the papers today. Before we finish, can I bring up one other thing, which is the hockey, the women's hockey?
Yeah, please do.
Because I think it's important to reference that with the World Cup going on again, and a New Look Irish side qualified for the World Cup. I think, frankly, I know it was at a tricky time for the newspapers, and a couple of them, the Mail on Sunday and the Sunday Times, carry match reports. But considering we're talking about the World Cup silver medalists from 4 years ago, Olympic qualifiers, a team that have a connection with the Irish public, I don't think there's any doubt about that. It is a pretty paltry offering in the newspapers today, and I do want to mention that, even though I know I'm going to get slaughtered for it, but it's true. Okay. The Sunday Times piece is worth reading, and gives you a sense of where they are. It's an Irish side with 4 debutants yesterday, losing 5-1 to the Netherlands, and I made the point earlier, for the Irish women's hockey team to go and play against the world champions in their own backyard was akin to the Irish rugby team having to go to New Zealand and play in New Zealand in their own backyard yesterday. No easy assignment, lost 5-1, not as bad as it might have sounded, and remember, this is an Irish team with no Anna Flanagan or Chloe Watkins or Nikki Daly or Shirley McKay, so there were a lot of new players playing. The big news for the Irish women's hockey team is really the whole tournament rests on their game against Chile on Tuesday. If they win that, then they'll go into their final group game against Germany a couple of days later with something to play for. So all eyes on them on Tuesday, and a new group and continuing development of women's hockey in the country.
Jimbo, can I just make a quick point?
In 30 seconds, if you can, Tim. Okay. Apologies.
Best of luck to the Irish basketball team. We played at 5 o'clock in the big game against Switzerland. If they win, they have a chance of qualifying. And in the lightheartedness of the end of it, everything, on page 2 in Peter O'Reilly's piece, Jack O'Toole says, "My brother Tom is playing against the All Blacks. This is surreal." And that's what sport is all about.
Very good. Tim McCarthy, appreciate it, Tim. Thanks so much.
See you, Joe. See you, Ryan.
And Ryle Nugent, thank you for coming to the studio. Appreciate it.
Thanks, gents.
The Sunday papers.
On Off the Ball.